The first quarter of the year is officially over, which means it's time to do my quarterly reading wrap-up discussing my favorite reads of the first quarter and all of my reading stats. In the first 3 months of 2025, I read 18 books and am currently on track for my Goodreads reading goal. My average rating across all of the books that I read was 3.88 stars, which is a really good rating. There are timestamps down below if you want to jump to a certain part of the video, but without further ado, let's talk about my stats from this first quarter of the year. In the month of January, I read these 7 books. This added up to a total of 2,861 pages. Then in February, I read 5 books. It was my lowest month of the year in terms of page count. However, it was also the shortest month. In February, I read 1,816 pages. And then in March, I read 6 books for a total of 2,163 pages. And this was also my month with the highest average rating of 4.16, though that's because I was rereading The Hunger Games, and obviously every single Hunger Games book I now rated 5 stars. Now let's look at my genre breakdown chart that I made for you all. My genres: I read 4 mystery books, 3 historical fiction books, 3 historical mysteries. I am a historical mystery girly, in case you didn't know, and I write that genre, so I thought they deserved their own category. 3 thrillers, 1 nonfiction, and 4 young adult dystopian books, though that's just because I did a complete reread of the Hunger Games trilogy. I don't really read YA books anymore, but I did a vlog where I reread all of these, and it was really fun, though this is not the type of thing that I would usually pick up nowadays. So now that we discussed my stats, let's talk about some of my particular favorite books of this quarter. And let me say that this doesn't mean that I didn't like the other books that I read. These are just ones that were particular standouts, or that I felt like I had more things to say about. One of my favorite books of January was The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton. I am a big Stuart Turton fan. I think The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle is still far and away my favorite by him, but this was another really good book by this author, and he is definitely an author where I'm going to keep checking out his books as long as he keeps writing them. What made this book stand out to me is it's really like no other mystery that I've ever read before. It is set in a futuristic world where most of mankind has been wiped out by a deadly fog. The survivors are now living in a community under a dome that is protecting them from the fog, and there are a group of scientists who are sort of their de facto leaders and are not meant to be questioned. Seemingly, they live a utopian existence. However, when one of the scientists turns up dead, and not just dead, but murdered, it turns out that one of the people living in this community is the killer. But plot twist, they've all had their memories wiped, so the person who is the murderer doesn't even realize that they did it. And secondly, if they don't figure out who the murderer is and bring them to justice, then the dome is going to fail, and all of them will be at the mercy of the deadly fog that almost took out the human species once. Stuart Turton is so good at coming up with really unique plots for his books. All of the books that he's written so far are just very unique and different from other books that I've read. And usually I don't really like sci-fi books or dystopian books or things like that, but because Stuart Turton wrote this, I knew that I had to check it out, and I'm really glad that I did. There was a part of the book that left me genuinely really surprised, and I think this book also prompted a lot of reflection on the nature of humankind and our future, especially in an age with things like artificial intelligence. So not only was this book an intriguing read, but it was actually surprisingly thought-provoking, and that was what I really liked about it. Stuart Turton mentions in his author's note to this book that he is planning to do a more contemporary thriller for his next release, and let me tell you, I am seated, ready to see what he's going to come up with. The next book that I wanted to bring up as one of my favorites of the quarter is The Floating Admiral by the Detection Club. In case you don't know, the Detection Club is a group that still exists today, and it was founded in the 1930s by Britain's greatest crime writers, including people like Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers. The Floating Admiral is a round-robin style story that members of the group collaborated on, where each one of them wrote an individual chapter. After writing their chapter, they would write down who, in their mind, the murderer was, and then put it in a sealed envelope. So each person would start their chapter not knowing where their predecessors intended for the story to go, and just having to continue the story not knowing where their clubmates were going with it. There were times where you could see that one of the authors was trying to take the story in a different direction. I do really feel for Anthony Barclay Cox, who was responsible for tying everything up into a neat bow in the end, and in fact, he actually titled his final chapter, "Cleaning Up the Mess." The plot of this book is a basic classic mystery plot dealing with a very small English town where an admiral is found dead in his boat floating down the canal. But what makes this book really stand out is getting to see the ideas that all the different mystery authors had. There's an appendix at the back of the book where you can see all of the individual solutions that each club member came up with, and I have to say, I was really surprised by the way that Agatha Christie wanted to take this book. Minor spoilers, but her ending involved cross-dressing and was not what I expected from Dame Agatha. I also really enjoyed reading the introduction that Dorothy L. Sayers wrote to this book when it was originally published. I found her tone very amusing, and there is a little part where she discusses how some people say that crime writers would make really good murderers, but Dorothy says, nah, that's not the truth. Me and my friends, we would never commit a real murder because we get all our aggression out on the page, killing fictional people. I think if you're a fan of classic mysteries and you just want to read a really fun little book, then this is a great one to check out. I really loved the collaborative element, and it was super fun to see how each individual writer would have ended the story. The next book that I want to talk about is actually an ARC that I read on NetGalley, so thank you so much to the publisher Kensington Books for gifting me this copy in exchange for my honest feedback. This is actually the second in a series, and guys, this series needs more hype on BookTube. I'm talking about A Slash of Emerald by Patrice McDonough. This is the second book in her Dr. Julia Lewis historical mystery series. The first book is titled Murder by Lamplight, and I also read that one on NetGalley when it came out last year. This is a series set in Victorian-era London following Dr. Julia Lewis, who is a female doctor. She went to medical school in America before coming back to England because in England in this time period, women are not allowed to go to medical school. Upon her return, she ends up meeting Inspector Richard Tennant, a Crimean War veteran and detective at Scotland Yard, and the two of them end up collaborating on murder mystery cases. In the second volume, Richard and Julia end up collaborating on a case of several female artists who are receiving poisoned pen letters that may end up being connected to a mysterious death in their social circle. In my review for the first book, I described this series as having the romance of Miss Scarlet and the Duke with the gritty tone of Ripper Street, and I totally stand by that assessment. If you're looking for a nice mystery with a slow burn romance, but also some darker themes, then this is the perfect series for you to read. The will they or won't they between Richard and Julia is so delicious. I love their interactions, and this book also addresses some of the gritty realities of living in Victorian London. Books do address some dark subject matters, and the deaths can at times be violent in the first book in particular, so do look up some trigger warnings for these books if you think that's something that you would like to know about before you pick them up. But the characters are really wonderful. I had to quit watching Miss Scarlet and the Duke when they wrote the Duke off, and this series is helping to fill that nice Victorian crime-solving slow burn hole in my heart. I also think that the mysteries are really well constructed in these books. Both the first book and this book, I felt like the ultimate reveal of who the guilty party was very well executed, and the clues were very cleverly laid along the way. If you love a historical mystery like I love a historical mystery, you gotta read these books, and I really hope that Inspector Tennant and Dr. Lewis will be back for another installment. Then my favorite read of February was definitely Just Another Missing Person by Gillian McAllister. I previously read Wrong Place, Wrong Time by the same author, and it was one of my favorite books of last year, so I read this book from her backlist and I really, really enjoyed it. Main character is a missing persons detective, and one night she is threatened by a mysterious man who tells her that if she does not frame someone for a recent disappearance, then this person is going to reveal something very damning that they know about the detective's daughter. This book is told in multiple perspectives, and the different characters all come together in the end in some very surprising ways. There was a reveal that genuinely surprised me and that I thought was exceptionally well done. This is my second Gillian McAllister book. I really enjoyed this one as well, and I look forward to reading more from her. I need to check out her new release sometime this year. And of course, when discussing my favorite books of this quarter, we need to talk about Sunrise on the Reaping. I'm not going to spoil anything in case you haven't read it yet, but this was the very highly anticipated Hunger Games prequel centering on Haymitch, and it was such a well-done, emotional, at times shocking read. In Catching Fire, the second Hunger Games book, we do learn some information about the Hunger Games that Haymitch participated in. However, there are lots of surprises that you won't see coming in this book nonetheless. Suzanne Collins shocked me by chapter 2. Chapter 2, she already had my jaw dropping. There were plot twists that left me stunned, deaths that made me emotional, and new characters who I really loved reading about, especially Macy Lee Donner. She is an icon. She is the moment. This year, I reread the Hunger Games trilogy for the first time in over 10 years, and it was just really amazing to revisit these books as an adult and get this new book to read for the first time. Suzanne Collins created some truly iconic characters, and her political and social commentary is so on point. I will also say that I personally do not cry reading books all that often. It really doesn't happen that frequently, and I did not shed a single tear in this book. I thought that I was going to get away without crying until I got to the epilogue, and that was the part that finally made me tear up. It was such a well-done epilogue that filled me with all of the feels. I literally read it 4 times. After I film this video, I might read it again. What of it? This book was just chef's kiss. I loved it. One of my favorite reads of the entire quarter. I know some people did complain about the cameos and Easter eggs in this, though, to be honest, I think the cameos all served a purpose and make sense. I can see why some people wouldn't like them, and there was one part that felt slightly unbelievable to me, but honestly, I do think they were all there for a reason. They weren't just fan service, but they did serve to recontextualize events from the original trilogy. And finally, the last book that I wanted to spotlight was another ARC, Murder at Gulls Nest by Jess Kidd. This is coming out on April 8th. This mystery was really just a delight to read. It had a classic Agatha Christie feel, very Miss Marple-esque in certain ways. This is the first in a new series, and the main character is a woman named Nora Breen, who was previously a nun, but has recently left her convent to investigate the disappearance of a friend. This friend, Frida, was staying at this boarding house in the seaside village of Gore-on-Sea in Kent, England, and she was writing Nora, but all of a sudden her letters stopped. Nora does not believe that Frida would stop writing her, and so she thinks that her friend may have met with foul play. Nora then decides to leave the convent and go to this same boarding house undercover to investigate Frida's disappearance, and things take a turn because one of the residents soon turns up dead. This book is set in the 1950s, so it has a post-World War II atmosphere. And it really did feel like a classic Christie mystery in many ways, very much like a Miss Marple novel in terms of Nora as a protagonist and her skill sets. I liked Nora as a protagonist entering the big, wide world for the first time in many years and using her wits to try to figure out what happened to her friend. Now, this book is marked on Goodreads as being a cozy mystery, and I do think it is cozy in the way that Agatha Christie is cozy, but not cozy in terms of the modern-day publishing market for cozies. And this book does address some sensitive topics, so again, maybe look up potential trigger warnings if there are certain topics that might be hard for you to read about. But ultimately, it was a really enjoyable classic-style mystery with a colorful cast of characters and an interesting protagonist. As I mentioned, this is the first in a new series titled Nora Breen Investigates, and I would definitely check out a sequel to this book because I thought it was a really fun mystery read. And let me know in the comment section, what was your favorite book that you read in the past 3 months? If you're still here and you don't know what to comment, but you want to show your support, why don't you leave a purple heart emoji in the comments? Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. I post new videos every single week. If you want to see more from me, check out this reading vlog where I read classic mysteries by the other queens of crime, Dorothy L. Sayers, Marjorie Allingham, and Nio Marsh. Thank you so much for being here today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you next time.